On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171 crashed 32 seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad. 260 people died. 1 year later, the investigation has produced one preliminary report, one interim statement, and no final conclusion. But 3 days ago, something changed. The Federation of Indian Pilots, representing 6,000 pilots across India, formally accused the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau of omitting critical cockpit warning data from its report. They commissioned 10 independent Boeing 787 simulator exercises, and those simulations produced a result that directly contradicts the sequence the AAIB described. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a credentialed aviation body with 6,000 members, a formal government petition, and simulator data that the official investigation has not produced, because the official investigation, according to the Pilots Federation, never ran the tests. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what data the pilots say was omitted, what the simulator tests actually showed, and why the answer to one specific question, whether the RAM air turbine deployed before or after the fuel switch is moved, changes everything about this investigation. Act 1, 1 year, one report, no answer. Before the new evidence, the context your audience needs. On June 12, 2025, Air India Flight 171 lifted off from Ahmedabad's Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport at 13:38 Indian Standard Time. The aircraft was a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, registration VTANB, carrying 230 passengers and 12 crew, 242 people, total bound for London Gatwick. 3 seconds after liftoff, both engine fuel control switches transitioned from run to cut-off, 1 second apart, according to the Enhanced Airborne Flight Recorder. Both engines lost thrust simultaneously. The RAM air turbine deployed. The aircraft began losing altitude before it crossed the airport boundary. 32 seconds after liftoff, it struck the BJ Medical College Hostel 1.7 kilometers from the runway. 260 people died. 1 survived. The AAIB released a preliminary report on July 12, 2025, 1 month after the crash. It confirmed the fuel switch sequence. It captured the cockpit voice recorder exchange, one pilot asking the other why he cut the fuel, the other denying it. It did not identify which pilot made which statement. It drew no conclusions about cause. On June 12, 2026, the 1-year anniversary, the AAIB issued an interim statement. It said significant progress had been made. It provided no timeline for the final report. Investigation veterans, speaking to The Wire, said the interim statement failed both the letter and the spirit of ICAO Annex 13, the international standard for accident investigation interim reports. One expert described it as a content-free placeholder that opens with a solemn tribute and closes without a single technical disclosure. The Civil Aviation Minister told reporters on June 15th that the final report might be published very soon, adding that the AAIB was against unnecessary haste. 1 year, 260 dead, one preliminary report, one content-free anniversary statement, no final report, no timeline. And then, 3 days ago, the Pilots Federation had enough. Act 2. What the Pilots Federation actually found. The Federation of Indian Pilots represents 6,000 pilots across India. Its president, Captain C.S. Randhawa, has been petitioning the Supreme Court of India since the crash. On June 20th, 2026, 3 days ago, the FIP went public with findings that the official investigation has not produced. Here is what they allege, verified across multiple sources, including Business Standard, The Wire, and Aviation Today. India, Allegation 1, missing cockpit warning data. The FIP alleges the preliminary report failed to include cockpit warning sequences that would normally accompany a significant electrical malfunction. The Federation contends that if an electrical disturbance occurred before the engines lost power, the cockpit voice recorder should contain caution messages, warning alerts, and associated audio that would have sounded in the cockpit. Simple flying. This is a specific and verifiable claim. The CVR records everything in the cockpit, not just pilot speech, but every oral warning, every caution chime, every system alert. If an electrical fault triggered a cascade of failures before the fuel switch is moved, Those warnings would be on the recording. The FIP says they are not in the preliminary report. They are asking why. Allegation 2. The ACARS records. The FIP has argued that the aircraft's final ACARS transmissions should be placed on record, saying the messages could provide important clues about the aircraft's condition in the moments before the crash. Pilot MAL ACARS, the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, is the digital system through which aircraft automatically transmit fault messages and operational data to airlines and maintenance teams via satellite in real time. If VTANB was experiencing electrical faults in the minutes before takeoff, those faults would have been transmitted via ACARS. The FIP has formally requested that Air India provide the original ACARS records, and that Boeing assist investigators in decoding the data. Allegation 3. The flight data recorder damage. The Federation of Indian Pilots, FIP, has raised questions regarding the condition of the aircraft's flight data recorder. While the tail section of the aircraft was recovered relatively intact, the recorder itself reportedly sustained major damage. Given that the flight data recorder operates on electrical power, the pilots group contends that the device requires more detailed technical examination to ensure that electrical failures did not corrupt or obscure the data recovered from the unit. Feedspot, the tail of a Boeing 787, is one of the most structurally reinforced sections of the aircraft, specifically because the flight recorders are housed there. The FIP is asking a precise question. If the tail was relatively intact, why was the recorder extensively damaged? And critically, could an electrical failure before the crash have affected the data the recorder captured? Allegation 4. The FADEC system. The Federation of Indian Pilots, FIP, has urged investigators to examine whether a malfunction or protective system response within the engine control architecture, the Full Authority Digital Engine Control, FADEC, could have contributed to the simultaneous loss of power from both engines. Simple flying. The FADEC is the brain of the engine. It manages every aspect of engine operation. If a FADEC malfunction or a protective logic response, like the TCMA system that caused the ANA 2019 incident, commanded fuel cutoff without pilot input, the physical switch position would have changed as a consequence, not a cause. The FIP wants this examined before the final report is issued. Act 3. The simulator tests, the evidence the AAIB didn't run. This is the most significant development in the entire investigation since the preliminary report was released. The FIP commissioned 10 independent simulator exercises using a Boeing 787 Level D full-flight simulator, the highest fidelity simulator available, used for actual pilot-type rating certification. These were not informal tests. Level D simulators are certified by aviation regulators as equivalent to the actual aircraft for training purposes. The FIP commissioned these simulator tests after repeatedly calling on the AAIB since July 2025 to conduct similar evaluations as part of the investigation. According to the pilot's body, those requests were not acted upon. Tubix, the AAIB, was asked to run simulator tests. According to the FIP, it did not, so the pilots ran them independently. Here is what the simulator tests found and why it matters. The AAIB preliminary report stated that the RAM air turbine became operational approximately 4 seconds after the fuel control switches moved from run to cutoff. The FIP's simulator data says something different. Fresh Boeing 787 Level D simulator tests commissioned by the FIP show that the aircraft's emergency power, the RAM air turbine, would have needed around 10 to 14 seconds after engine failure to become operational, not 4 seconds as suggested by the AAIB timeline. Thrust Flight read that again. The AAIB says the RAT became operational 4 seconds after the switches moved. The FIP's simulator tests, run 10 times on a certified Level D Boeing 787 platform, show the RAT needs 10 to 14 seconds after engine failure to deploy and become operational. If the simulator data is correct, the RAT could not have deployed 4 seconds after the switches moved from run to cutoff following engine failure. Which means one of 2 things must be true. Either the RAT deployed before the engines failed, meaning an electrical event triggered it independently of the fuel switch sequence, or the AAIB's 4-second timeline contains an error. The AAIB has not responded to the wire's request for comment on the simulator findings. The final report has not been released. Neither the simulator data nor the AAIB timeline can be declared definitive until the final report addresses this specific contradiction. Across 9 documented simulator tests, the engine restart values at the moments tagged in the AAIB timeline sat in the 32 to 45% band, well below the typical self-sustaining idle threshold of the GEnx engines. This means the engines were attempting to restart, but had not reached the power level needed to sustain themselves. Thrust flight. This is the forensic heart of the Federation of Indian Pilots' argument. If the engines were attempting to restart at only 32 to 45% of the power needed to sustain idle, at 180 knots, 3 seconds after liftoff, fast decelerating, there was never a viable recovery window. The aircraft was going down from the moment the engines lost thrust, regardless of what happened next. The Federation of Indian Pilots' conclusion from all 10 simulator tests, which they have formally submitted to the government, is that the sequence described by the AAIB cannot be replicated in a certified simulator environment, and that the most likely explanation for the discrepancy is that the ram air turbine deployed before the fuel switches moved, indicating a systemic electrical failure triggered the emergency, not a human hand on a switch. Captain Randhawa drew a direct parallel to the investigation into the Miracle on the Hudson, the 2009 emergency landing of US Airways Flight 1549 on New York's Hudson River. In that investigation, the NTSB ran multiple simulator exercises before concluding that returning to LaGuardia Airport would not have been feasible in the available time, ultimately validating Captain Sullenberger's decision to ditch in the river. Randhawa said the same standard of simulator-based validation must be applied to AI-171, especially because the 2 pilots who could provide their own account died in the crash. Aket 4. What the investigation must now answer. The Federation of Indian Pilots' allegations create a list of specific questions that the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, must address in its final report. Not as a matter of opinion, but as a matter of ICAO Annex 13 standards, which require investigations to examine all credible evidence before reaching conclusions. Question 1. Where is the cockpit warning data? If an electrical malfunction preceded the engine failure, the cockpit voice recorder should contain oral warnings. Were those warnings present, and if so, why were they not in the preliminary report? If they were absent, why? Question 2. What do the ASAR's records show? The aircraft's automatic fault transmission system would have captured any pre-departure or pre-crash faults in real time. The Federation of Indian Pilots has requested this data. Has the AAIB examined it, and what did it show? Question 3. Can the AAIB's 4-second ram air turbine timeline be replicated in a certified simulator? The Federation's 10 simulator tests say it cannot. If the AAIB's timeline cannot be independently replicated on a certified Boeing 787 Level D platform, the preliminary report's sequence of events requires revision. Question 4. Why was the flight data recorder extensively damaged when the tail section was relatively intact? Does the damage pattern suggest an electrical event affected the recorder before or during the crash? Question 5. Was a FADEC or TCMA system response involved? The All Nippon Airways 2019 incident demonstrated that a TCMA software logic error can command fuel cutoff without pilot input on a Boeing 787. Has this been examined and ruled out for AI-171? These are not advocacy questions. They are the technical questions that any rigorous ICAO Annex 13 investigation is required to address. The Federation of Indian Pilots is not asking for a conclusion favorable to pilots. It is asking for an investigation rigorous enough that its conclusion, whatever it is, can be independently replicated and verified. 260 people. 1 year. 1 preliminary report that drew no conclusions. 1 anniversary statement that provided no timeline. And now a formal allegation from a pilots' federation with 6,000 members that critical cockpit warning data was omitted from the report, that ACARS records have not been disclosed, that the flight data recorder damage requires closer examination, and that 10 independent simulator tests cannot replicate the sequence the AAIB described. The families of 260 people are still waiting for an answer. Captain Sumit Sabharwal cannot speak for himself. He died in the crash. His father is petitioning India's Supreme Court. The pilots who fly Boeing 787 aircraft across India every day are asking questions the investigation has not answered. The final report will have to choose between two conclusions that could not be more different: a faulty switch or a human hand. And the credibility of that verdict will rest on engineering, not assumption. Top documentary films. The AAIB says the report is coming very soon. When it drops, Inside Aviation will cover every word, every verified fact, every question it answers, and every question it does not. Subscribe now. This investigation is not over. And for the 260 people who died on June 12, 2025, it cannot end without an answer that holds up.